As a child, I could not communicate properly.
It really sucks when you can't communicate, right? Divorce in the United States, number one cited reason is communication. If you look at aviation disasters, from the space shuttle to commercial airplanes, it's communication. Medical errors, communication. Businesses that are ineffective communicators.
We are going to demystify communication. How did you come up with this title? Simply put.
Simplicity is better than complication. Just one of the most effective things you can do is test your message. If you're okay at being a designer or a programmer or a carpenter, but you're good at communicating, that's also a job in and of itself. If you're not able to be effective at communicating, it's done any other job. I mean, that's Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, all the people that we see on TV. That's a separate job than being like the great scientist.
What are the important ingredients of a good conversation?
I would say that the key thing about being an effective communicator is caring about the receiver. It is putting their needs first. Instead of locking people in and being like, oh, well, we need to squeeze every last drop out of you. Schedule a second meeting the next day, right? Like let people's tanks refill a little bit and they cannot wait to leave because they're doing a TED Talk. They're not doing a conversation.
What comes in the way for people to implement all these very basic techniques?
I think the biggest thing is that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Hey, Ben, such a pleasure having you here. How have you been today?
Great to see you, Gaurav. Nice to be here. I was talking to you a moment before and saying that it is raining cats and dogs here in New York, but you are a bright spot in the day. So it's great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You've been extremely kind always. Always. Yeah. So, Ben, finally we are here. So, Ben, there are so many things that I wanted to explore with you. And as I mentioned, in today's conversation, we are going to demystify conversations. We are going to demystify communication. We are going to demystify what it means to simply put forward your message. So where would you like to begin?
Well, I'm excited to be here and talk about simplicity. So my new book, my first book, is called Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. I am super excited to talk about it and to share it with folks. And it's all about how we can be better at informing, at persuading, and being more effective at any role that we have.
So let's explore it. Ben, very curious, how did you pick up this topic for yourself? And what was that point where you decided to write a book, your first book on this subject? And how did you come up with this title? Simply Put, period.
I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. And I have taught marketing now for just about the same amount of time at Baruch College here in New York. And the one thing I have seen in both of those roles, as well as a user of the world, right, as a consumer, a voter, a donor, I have seen that it is so hard for so many people and organizations to get their point across in a way that respects the receiver, in a way that is compelling them to action. And I ended up with this question that came up over and over and over again in that experience, which is, why do some messages work when others don't? Why are some ads effective when others aren't? Why are some political slogans effective when others aren't? Why are some warnings or informative messages sticky and others aren't? And as it turns out, after I sold my business about a year ago, and I started looking into this a little bit more, turns out that the answer is simple. It's the simple messages win. Simple messages convince, inform, and persuade. And it's not that revelatory of a response, right? Like simplicity is better than complication. But it turns out that there are different tools that we can use to get there, and so that all of us can become better communicators. And so backing up though to your other question about the book title, it's an example of one of the tools I put in the book, which is testing. And this is not, again, anything that's going to be a surprise to a lot of folks. It's one of the most effective things you can do is test your message. I worked with my editor, came up with a list of titles of him, and we went and narrowed a few down. We went to people who were in our audience, people who were marketers or entrepreneurs or leaders of some sort. And we said, which one of these represents this idea the best? And turns out that was it. Simply put, why clear messages win and how to design them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Ben, for sharing this part of your life. Communication conversations have played a very vital role in my life. And it's of huge significance to me. And I'll tell you why. Because as a child, I could not communicate properly. I used to stutter and forget about clear messaging. I could not even speak properly. And I remember my friends making fun of me, and I would be the reason for their laughter. And I remember very vividly tears rolling down my cheek because they're making fun of me.
That's an incredibly vivid account of what we see everywhere we look. If you look, divorce in the United States, number one cited reason is communication. If you look at aviation disasters, from the space shuttle to commercial airplanes, it's communication. Medical errors, communication. Businesses that are ineffective communicators have lower valuations than those that are more effective communicators. And so it's, people ask, like, why does it matter? Because it really sucks when you can't communicate, right? As you're saying, if you're in that situation, unfortunately on the schoolyard, it's a topic of ridicule, but everywhere else that we go, it's part of the main work that we have as anything we do in business and as in our personal lives, is to connect from one person to another.
Yeah. Ben, just wondering, do you have a scar with you from your life when you realize that, communication is important? For example, I told you, right? And that's where communication became important to me, because I did not want to be a reason of laughter for other individuals. I didn't want to be ridiculed. When did you realize that communication, clear messaging is important?
That's an incredible question. And I don't think I've put enough thought into unpack that necessarily. I don't think that there's, at least at the conscious level, that there's something for me that is driving it in the same way. I think it's more of, one thing I've seen over and over, personally, professionally, has been people that are really great, really smart, really driven, really mission focused, and organizations that are the same, the great political movements or brands. When they struggle and because of communication they fail, that is something that I think is a big problem, big missed opportunity. I think that's something that motivates me a little bit, is just to see so many things that were otherwise a good idea, a good policy, a good product, fail because they couldn't connect.
Yeah. You know what? As much as I knew, as much as I understand, as much as I am convinced the way you communicate, the way you message is important, but I think the way you shared that, be it aviation industry or the medical industry, be it business or sales, communication plays a very vital role. It could be a lack of effective communication can be a reason for an accident. A lack of effective conversations might mean loss of business. I never looked at that from that perspective. And I'm not surprised, because very often when I work with individuals or when I talk to leaders, communication is very often an area that they would like to develop, because they are experiencing the pain that I experienced as a child.
Absolutely. It's something that we have to do all the time. There's no escaping it. And no matter what job you do, this is a book, and my background's in marketing, right? And this is a book that will live on the marketing shelf of a bookstore. And it will certainly be valuable to a lot of people who run marketing agencies, work in marketing. But it's really for anybody that's an advocate or a leader or an entrepreneur or a parent, a friend, anybody who's tasked with having to move people to do things, or to just connect one idea to another one, has to do it. And that includes everybody. So if you're not able to be effective at communicating, it stunts any other job that you have. But also what's interesting, and this is a little bit separate from the book, I have found that if you are okay at your job, if you are okay at what you do, it can't be bad, but if you're okay at being a designer or a programmer or, a carpenter, but you're good at communicating, that's also a job in and of itself. Being a good, a good scientist and being a great communicator, that's Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, all the people that we see on TV. That's a separate job than being like the great scientist. If people are looking for an opportunity to kind of, expand their careers, expand their influence, embracing that and becoming really good at that is also going to be an interesting path.
Of course. And especially in a world where we are living in right now, which is where we have the information overload, it's becoming more and more crucial to simplify the complex ideas and make them accessible to your audience. I think what differentiates one from another is the way you've been able to communicate and put forward your point of view. In your research, Ben, and all the work that you have done, what do you think are the important ingredients of a good conversation?
So in the book, I define simple communication as something that is easily perceived, understood, and acted upon. And so that's the benchmark. Well, like, it's going to be easily taken from out in the world, stuck into your head, and made sense of. And as I looked into this, I found 5 different principles. I identified 5 principles that make up effective messaging, that are elemental to that conversation, that marketing message, whatever it is. And so the first one is beneficial. What does it matter to the receiver? Are you talking, what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? Number 2 is focused. Are you saying one thing, or are you trying to say 3 different things at the same time? Priority is singular. Number 3 is salient. Salient means that it comes to your attention, that it stands out, it sticks out, it contrasts, and it becomes something you notice. And how do you stand out? You mentioned the busy world. 13 hours, the average American spends 13 hours a day consuming some form of media. It's a lot of messaging you're hearing in that time. How do you stand out in that really, really crowded feed? And then the last couple, we have empathetic, which is, are you speaking in the language of your user, literally and figuratively? You're meeting them where they are. And then lastly, it's minimal. And when we talk about minimal, I put this at the end very intentionally, because it's about having everything you need, but only what you need. It's about having not the fewest number of words or pixels or whatever. It's about the least amount of friction. You want to optimize for what's important in there. And so those 5 elements, the more you can act upon them, the more you can take advantage of them, the more effective you're going to be in whatever your mission is.
Yeah. Just for my benefit, let me just repeat that. One is it should be beneficial. Then you mentioned it should be focused. It should be sharp focused. I should be very clear about what I want to communicate, not 2 ideas, not 5 ideas, just the single idea, right? Then you spoke about salient. Then you spoke about being empathetic. The last one you spoke about minimal, right?
Absolutely. You nailed it.
Yeah.
And if you do all those things right, then you're going to be in really good shape. And if you miss a couple, you still might be okay. But the thing about our nature is that we so often push back in the other way. We have what's going on as an additive bias. Whenever researchers do different experiments and they say, how would you change X, Y, or Z to make it better? People always respond with saying, hey, we're going to add more. They do something of a structure, little Lego bricks. People add more Lego bricks. They do things where they have like a mini golf course. They add more holes to the mini golf course. They do things where they have a vacation itinerary. They add more things to that. And you can extrapolate this and say, well, when we're facing a business problem, what do? We hire more people, right? We add more stuff. We add another page to our website. We add another button in our navigation, and we add another slide to our deck. And that's our nature. And what also hurts us is that the world which we live in incentivizes that even more, right? There's no evidence of absence. If you remove something, if you subtract that button, that page, that slide, that paragraph, that word, nobody notices. The people don't build statues and have holidays for the people that remove a bridge, but they have them for people that build a bridge. And when you compound that with everybody in their own self-interest looking and saying, hey, I want to be able to point to the thing that I did. And on top of that, when you look at the bravery that it takes to be simple and clear, because there's nowhere to hide, it's a really heavy side of the equation there that pushes us in the other direction. So by equipping ourselves with these tools, you're able to break through and push back on that.
Yeah. What I'm listening is, Ben, that less is more. For as long as I know what to communicate, that's enough. So I don't need to add extra frills to my conversation. I don't need to further add a lot of cosmetic, aesthetic touches to my conversation. But I'm more interested in, Ben, the first point when you spoke about being beneficial, right? It should be beneficial for the other person. Is there any formula that you have been able to decode for yourself or for your audience? How would I know what is beneficial for the other person?
Absolutely. So, well, first you said less is more. I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I think actually the better maxim there is by a designer named Dieter Rams. So Dieter Rams, if you've ever seen the company Braun, he was the big designer behind Braun. He inspired Steve Jobs and Johnny Ives and all their industrial design. One of the 20th century's most famous designers. His whole thing was less but better. So it's less but better, not necessarily less is more, less but better. And so I think that's an important tweak on that maxim in order to make sure that we make the most use of it. Less but better. So the beneficial piece of the puzzle. If anybody has ever been in marketing or sales, you kind of learn this on day one, which is that people don't buy features, they buy benefits. People don't want the thing, they want what the thing does for them. In the 20th century, a marketing professor at Harvard, Theodore Levitt, said this phrase that I tell my students: if you listen to nothing else in my entire class, if you listen to nothing else in your entire degree, listen to this sentence and understand it and stick it in your back pocket for the rest of your career, which is people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole. They don't want a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole. We don't want the thing. We want what the thing does for us. And I would even argue you can go another step beyond that. You can say, I don't even want the hole. I want the picture up on the wall. I don't even want the picture up on the wall. I want to see my family because that reminds me of love and belonging, these like fundamental needs that I have. And the equation to get there, I call it in the book the drill build method, but you can go into more depth on that piece and identify the functional benefits, the emotional benefits. But the only thing you really need to remember off of that is the question, so what? And ask it like a little bit of like an annoying child, right? So what? So what? Your toothpaste has minty flavor in it. Well, so what? I don't need the minty flavor. Well, you're buying it because it makes your breath fresh. So what? Well, then you're gonna make a better impression on that date you have later, right? And you care about that. So what? Because again, that's love and belonging or physical needs or whatever you want to associate with it. And there you go. You have the recipe for where you want to start playing in your messaging, in your advertising. You take that and you look at that list and say, I have the need, the emotional benefit, the functional benefit, and the features. And then off of that, I can decide where I want to start building my message.
I'm just wondering, I just love these two words when you said, so what? You spoke about features, emotional as well as functional benefits, and the needs, right? And if I can put all these four together, it will allow me to understand what is it the other person, what it is that the person is looking for. And for as long as I can get that in place, I'll be able to communicate that's going to serve the other person. I'm sure thousands of people are going to read your book. And I can guarantee you, not everyone would become a speaker of a repute, if I may use this word, or of a similar caliber. What, according to you, differentiates one conversationalist from another? Because it's not only about communication, it's about being a conversationalist, right? There is something very unique in the way Mr. Obama speaks. There's something profound when Oprah communicates. Very distinguished in the way Larry used to ask questions. Or there are enough and more examples of the communicators who have been able to create that impression and build their influence in the way they connect and engage in a dialogue. What is it that we are missing as conversational scientists that we need to consider?
You rattled off a great list of folks there that probably are combining some methodology and frameworks with a very high degree of natural skill, to be honest. And for a lot of those folks, I would say that the key thing about being an effective communicator in a business setting and marketing setting, as well as in a conversational setting, is caring about the receiver. It is putting their needs first. We talk about that with beneficial, we talk about empathetic, but the entire framework is all about respecting their time, their energy, their interest, their resources, and starting from that humble beginning instead of assuming that everybody needs to hear me. Everybody needs to hear what I have to say and listen to me. Everybody shut up, go buy my product. That's not a winning equation for anybody. And if you look at each one of those communicators, especially when you look at those, you mentioned Larry King and you mentioned Oprah Winfrey, they're exceptionally interested in who they're talking to. They're not just coming in and saying, okay, here's like the 5 questions that I wrote up before, and let's just, go bam, bam, bam. And maybe they do have questions. They've done very well researched questions. They've done, they have good follow-ups because they're genuinely interested in finding what the other person has to say. And I mean, right now, I'm happily married. I've been together with my wife for 10 years now. But I remember the times before that, and you go on a date with somebody, and maybe it's not that interesting. But it's a lot of times, and I hear from my single friends now, the same problems. They talk to people, they just will talk at them for an hour. They'll have a beer or get a coffee or something, and they'll talk, and their date will talk at them for an hour, and they cannot wait to leave because they're doing a TED talk. They're not doing a conversation.
Yeah. The words that resonated with me so much is they genuinely care for the other person.
I think that's the core tenet here. And what I say in the book, and if there's one kind of framework takeaway you should have, which is just like when you are writing a letter, you have to pay for the postage. You have to bear the literal and the metaphorical cost of communicating when you're the one sending it. And so it's about kind of putting yourself in that position of humility, of interest, and focusing on the receiver that makes you more effective in those scenarios.
Can you give me an example from your life, Ben, where as much as you were totally involved in a conversation, and yet you could not feel connected with the other person? At the same time, I'm sure you have experienced those moments as well, where only the conversation existed. Neither you were there nor the other person, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. I mentioned the bad dates. I'm very happy to not have to go on any more of them before. And that there's, they stick in your mind, the ones that you're like, I'm like pulling water from a stone, right? I've encountered that same phenomenon in business a number of times where I go and I'm meeting with a client, and the best client relationships are the ones where you sit down with them, you're talking for an hour, and the first 40 minutes of that hour, you're not really talking about business. You're talking maybe about sports or the weather or the neighborhood or whatever. And eventually you start to pivot to what the business is, because people want to work with people they like, right? And just being able to connect with people that way, I think is the difference a lot of times between someone who's a okay business person and somebody who gets more traction, is that they realize that it's not really about the actual work half the time. It's about people want to work with people they like, and they want to have that type of conversation that you just mentioned, where they feel like it's easy. They feel like this guy's your buddy. They feel like this guy's going to have your best interest in mind, and everything then becomes easier once you develop that level of trust.
And I'm just wondering, how did you develop all that? What is it that you did on day-to-day basis? What is it that you had to go through as an individual that allowed you to become the conversationalist that you are? Because I'm sure as much as we are born with that, we need to further chisel these skills as well. So if you can just take us through that process.
I don't want to go out and say that I'm like the great conversationalist, right? Like that's a very, big title to put on yourself. But I will say, in my experience, researching stuff for this book or doing the work in my agency, is the most important thing you can do in any scenario like that is just to be an interested person. That makes you a more interesting person to talk to. Interested in others, but also interested in other topics. The amount of people that I have met that work in marketing, and all they want to do is talk to you about like this ad campaign or this client, lost this account, whatever it was. It's fine. That's good to follow that stuff. But the clients you talk to, a lot of them just want to be like, hey, did you see the Yankee game last night? Or did you, what about the election? What about this? What about that? People are a lot more interested in other aspects of their life than they are business most of the time. People care about business is very important. I noticed this. I remember when I was in college and I was in student government, and I was the big dork in student government, the big nerd. And I loved it. It was great. But I knew a bunch of people that were really into it also. They were on my team, or people I ran against. And when you get really into it, you can think that's your whole world a little. But I realized that when I would go on Fridays to my internship, and my internship would have been in some government office or whatever, that there were other things. There were other things outside that universe. And it's important to be interested and understand the perspective from that. And it makes you a much more balanced person. And I think that ultimately makes you a more interesting person to talk with in that scenario.
Yeah. So let's steer this conversation towards your body of work. Simply put, I'm just wondering, can you share some real life examples where simplifying complex ideas has led to significant breakthrough for you, or some positive impact in your life?
I'll give you a very personal and lighthearted one, which is I have had the worst dental luck in my life. In the world. I have had cavity after cavity. I've had root canals. I've had braces and orthodontic work and all this other stuff. And one day, after not going to the dentist for a while because I was too lazy about it, my gums started to bleed when I brushed my teeth. I was like, this is not good. That can't be good. So I go to the dentist. I have to get some periodontal work done. And my dentist says something that changed the entire way which I behaved in terms of oral hygiene, which was you only have to floss the teeth you want to keep. And I was like, that was such a good line. That was such a good line. That completely changed my perspective. I'm like, fuck, you got me. Because before, you're telling me, you're not meeting me where I am. You're saying, well, if you floss twice a day and, you'll prevent plaque buildup below the gum line, all this other stuff, which your head understands is true. You think about it, you understand why you do it. But if you tell me bluntly in language and a fashion which I understand, you meet me there, you got me, and so ever since then I flossed every night, and I've had a few less cavities because of that.
Yeah. And just wondering, Ben, how do you believe simplifying complex ideas can contribute to fostering creativity and driving innovation in an organization or in a society that we are a part of, or the communities that we have been talking about?
I think they're one and the same. I think that the simplicity is about getting to the core truth of something a lot of times, and a lot of times that's where creativity comes from. There's a famous piece of writing advice that goes around from The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which they say, a paragraph has no unnecessary words. The same reason a drawing has no unnecessary lines. Anybody who's an artist will tell you that, it needs to have, everything matters in the art. There's nothing superfluous as part of that. And I think that's important when you look at messaging and innovation, all those things. And there's a lot of lessons. I tie it in on really across the board on there, which if you look at, there's one study, for instance, here, where we look at limitations. I talk about salience, and I talk about the benefits of constraints to improve your output. And if you look at how we generate ideas, if we're in a meeting together with people, they're like a committee or a group, there's kind of a hard cap sometimes about how many people can be in a room before the number of ideas start to hit a bottleneck. Once you have about 6 or 7 people in a meeting, the data shows that the total number of ideas shared caps out, because there's just not enough bandwidth. If you have 100 people in a room, it doesn't matter any more than you have 10 people in a room. You can't share more things at that point. And so there's a kind of a physical limitation of that. But what I found was there's this wonderful study where they look at the creative output of a group as they're brainstorming something, as they're developing ideas, and the quantity and quality of ideas, you come out of the gate guns a-blazing. people have really great things they've built up. They want to go and share them in this group brainstorm. But then after about 7 or 8 minutes, the pace of a new idea generate never stops, but the pace of new idea generation tends to decrease quite rapidly. And what that means is if you're looking to be more creative, sometimes it's best to let your subconscious work on it outside of things, let yourself work on it outside of things, and come to that meeting together, harvest those ideas, harvest that mess, the creativity, the innovation, whatever it is, harvest that. And instead of locking people in and being like, oh, well, we need to squeeze every last drop out of you, schedule a second meeting the next day, right? Like let the people's tanks refill a little bit and then go get them.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation with my designer. And I said, so we are working on some project, and I requested him, I said, I need 5 ideas, and I want all those 5 ideas to be different from each other. I don't want you to work on all those 5 ideas in one day. Take 5 days. I want you to work on just one idea, one design on daily basis. And once that's done, just take rest, go for a walk, take some free time for yourself. And in 5 days, come up with 5 ideas. So I know exactly what you're talking about, because creativity comes from a space of nothingness. That's what I tell people.
And I 100% agree. I think that you have to give yourself room to recharge on it. What I've also seen, I knew a designer, somebody once who one of his tools was to push past the comfort limit also. So you say, give me 5 ideas, but sometimes the creativity comes from, hey, I need you to give me 100 ideas, right? Like and because it's my limitations. I talk about constraints in terms of creativity. We just talked about like a time constraint on the small side, but if you can do a quantity constraint on both ends of it. You can say, I'm going to constrain you to a maximum of a certain number of things, or I can constrain you to a minimum of a certain number of things. And if I'm requiring a minimum of 100 banner designs or whatever, or slogans, well, okay, I'm going to do the cliche ones. I'm going to do the ones that are no duh, that, just kind of some idiom, turn of phrase. I'm going to get those all out of the way in the first dozen of them. And then I got to go and I got to really reach for some interesting stuff later on when I get to that, number 97, 98, 99. And so I have found that to be an interesting tool, is you can constrain yourself on both ends.
That's a wonderful advice. Ben, I have come across people who leverage storytelling in a way which is world-class. There's another set of people that I've come across who are very comfortable tapping into metaphors and that make their point so vivid and clear that people can see that so beautifully. And of course, there are people who use a lot of proverbs, idioms, analogies, adjectives. I'm just wondering, is there any formula to tap into that? I mean, how can I be a better storyteller?
All of those can be very powerful tools in communication, in marketing. We buy stories, right? Like that's 100% true. And there's a whole branch of marketing thought leadership that is on that front. I quote in the book, there's an artist that worked for Pixar, and one of their principles was saying that, remember, it's not about what's fun for you, it's about what's fun for the audience. It's about what matters to them. And so I think when you're talking about stories, and I was just in a meeting yesterday where I helped review some student stories, it's important that you understand that the story is about the receiver. Again, it's not about giving your own indulgence and making you look so great, telling the story because you feel it's fun. You have to use the story in order to get the point across that you want to get across. One piece of advice that I got from my editor, even in this process, as I was putting stories and anecdotes into the book, is the best thing you can do is get in and get out. And it, again, depends on different situations, but for writing this book, that was a great piece of advice.
Get in and get out.
Get in and get out. Get into the story, make your point, and get out of the story.
Okay.
And if you're talking about writing a book, doing a keynote presentation, something like that, I think that's really good advice. The story helps kind of ground people in like a beginning, middle, and end. There's a narrative arc, there's characters, but you don't want to dwell in it too much. Your point isn't about storytelling. There's people who, you could be a great storyteller. I'm not going to be writing a novel anytime soon, but the people who write amazing novels, and this is not advice for them. This is advice for using a story in your professional communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there any experience that you may want to share where you helped leaders, business leaders, to become better communicators, specifically better storytellers?
I mean, we had a number of clients over the years that we worked with who were there were authors who were doctors, and a lot of them were like in the functional medicine space. So it's about eating. It's more about your diet and lifestyle than it is your, pills and treatments, those type of things. And when we started working with one of our first clients, actually David Perlmutter, who is a great guy, he blew up my book and really, I love him. His book was called Grain Brain. It's all about gluten-free stuff. We didn't help writing the book. The book is great. But when we were marketing that, we identified saying, okay, well, it's not so much about the storytelling as it is about the story that we're empowering the users, the followers to tell. Because at the time, and this is, I think, 2013, not a lot of people, bought into the gluten-free and paleo stuff. And the people that did felt like they were often under attack from their friends, their family, people making fun of them. What are you doing this silly thing for? So we wanted to give people like the ammunition almost to defend themselves. We made sure we did a lot of science-based content. We cited studies all the time. We showed statistics because we wanted to help them tell their story in a more effective way. And that ended up being a really effective campaign. And that book sold a bajillion copies, and they just reissued it for their anniversary recently. And he's written, I think, another 5 or 6 books after that now, all of which have been bestsellers also.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm assuming all these stories are very much there in your book. I'm just wondering, Ben, what do you hope your readers will take away from, simply put, and how do you envision your book making a difference in their lives?
I hope that if they're going to take away one thing, it is what I said before, is that the sender bears responsibility for the success of communication. And that, again, you're the one paying for the stamp. You have to care, you have to do the work, you have to make sure that the receiver understands you and takes the action, because there's a certain amount of humility you have to have in terms of, you woke up today really caring about your own product or your campaign or whatever it is, but your audience didn't. They have a lot of things they care about, and your new shampoo brand is not one of them. They didn't have on their list today, let me go watch some commercials. Let me go click on some Instagram ads. Nobody wants any of that stuff. And so accepting that and putting yourself in a more humble position is the first step to doing all of this.
Despite the fact, and I think it's a repetition of, I asked a similar question from you some time back as well. What do you think? What comes in the way for people to implement all these very basic techniques that you have been talking about? Very basic and yet powerful. What are the possible impediments that people might have?
I think the biggest thing is that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. We talk about empathy and testing your message and talking to your audience. People really don't like to do that. I have worked with tons of clients over the years, and my students and somebody else. And if we ask them about doing user research, we ask them about, have you tested this? And it's not about, I'm not saying go to some bland conference room and do some target market thing forever. That's helpful some ways, but it's also not what I'm talking about. It's like, have you gone and talked to anybody that's your user at any point, that's your receiver? And so many people don't do that because it's kind of uncomfortable. It's awkward. I remember standing on the concourse at Grand Central Terminal here in New York, flagging people down to ask them questions about things, because that was my audience, and I needed to learn something from them. I didn't have to do it 1,000 times. You do it a few times, and you get the perspective you need on something. But people don't like it because it's uncomfortable, because it's awkward, and because they might hear things that they don't want to accept a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah. So as they always say, that it's not only the desire which is important to become a better communicator, it's your ability to deal with the discomfort that you have to deal with. Because it's only on the other side of the discomfort you can plant the seed to be a better communicator. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I think I love this conversation because it is very important to be a better communicator, and the world knows it. And I think the way you explained it in a very simple manner, right? It demystified, it decoded for me, how can I become a better Conversationalist. So looking forward to gifting this book called Simply Put to my friends so that we all can become better communicators. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences.
Pleasure to be here and excited to share this. If you're curious or anybody listening is curious, you can go check me out, benguttmann.com. And if you click around there, you can find a free chapter to download as well. So go check that out. Otherwise, I'm excited to get this out there, and it's been a pleasure to be here with you today, Gaurav.
Pleasure. Thank you.